Hello everybody, welcome to Little Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We are nearly at 15k subscribers, so it would be much appreciated. Also, drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Do you guys remember that one? If you've been around my content for a while, you might. In today's video, I want to talk about Doc Rivers because he said a quote that was baffling recently that I learned about live in the middle of our news recording for Tuesday's video on Rusty Buckets, but I was literally of the mind that maybe Rudy just got sentelled. Like, there's no way that this is a genuinely real quote, but here it is, and indeed it is real. It's sourced from Mark Spears. This is from Doc Rivers, mind you, and he's talking about blowing 3-1 leads. No one tells a real story, and I'm fine with that. It's unfair in some ways. I don't get enough credit for getting the 3 wins. I get credit for losing. I always say, what if we had lost to Houston in 6? No one cares. One of the things that I'm proud of is we've never been swept. All the coaches have been swept in the playoffs. My teams achieve. A lot of them overachieve, and I am proud of that. Doc Rivers has spearheaded an insane amount of teams that have underachieved. I can't think of a team that he has taken up the mantle of since the Clippers days and beyond that has not underachieved. The Lob City Clippers absolutely had a championship level ceiling, and they didn't even make it past the second round. The Kawhi Leonard, Paul George Clippers absolutely had a championship ceiling, did not make it past the second round the one year that they had him. Then he went and coached Philadelphia, and he was not good at his job then, and the Sixers were a little bit disappointing yet again, and now he's the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, and they haven't really come back out of the dirt where they started after the Dame trade initially disappointed. So I don't know what the fuck you are talking about. Your teams overachieve. You haven't had a team overachieve in a long, I don't even think that did the 2008 Celtics overachieve. I would say they achieved about as much as were expected of a team that was as powerful as it was by contrast to the rest of the league. So I don't even know if that's an instance of overachievement. Maybe Doc Rivers just has hilariously low expectations for every NBA team he joins, but that's kind of sad and pathetic in itself. And that's the way I feel about this entire quote, sad and pathetic. How are you supposed to look your players in the eye and act like winning is the only thing that matters, but you can't take the accountability for your losses? Because to me, this is absolutely avoiding it. They don't give me credit for the 3 wins. I only get credit for losing. Yeah, that's because you don't win a playoff series with 3 wins, buddy. As a head coach, you're expected to win the playoff series when you are favored, buddy. The 2015 or 2016, whichever year it was, where they blew that game 6 to the Houston Rockets and then lost in game 7. Yeah, dude, they're going to focus more on you blowing a 3-1 lead than you getting the 3-1 lead. What if we had lost to Houston in 6? Then no one cares. Actually, that's not true because the Clippers were favored to win that series versus Houston pretty heavily. It was James Harden, and that was kind of it. You got cooked by Josh Smith and Corey Brewer, dog. We're not talking about a series that people wouldn't have criticized you for if you just lost straight up in 6. You still would have caught a lot of heat for it. You just managed to lose in a more embarrassing way. And we're supposed to pretend like that's not what happened? That's not people telling a fake story. Telling the story that you were a heavy catalyst in your team blowing a 3-1 lead, not once, not twice, but 3 times. That is the story. The story has an ending to it, and you're mad about it. You're like, well, when you write out what happens in the playoff series for the first, 2/3 of it, I come out looking pretty good, and then this last part comes in. I don't think that's the story. That's not the real story. This first 2/3 where I was doing okay, that was the real story. But after I blew it and it was sad and everyone called me a loser, well, that part wasn't real. That wasn't the real story. But they're gonna keep saying that it is. That shit's not unfair, dude. It's not unfair. And I'll be the first to tell you that head coaches are over scrutinized in the NBA. I feel like they have been for pretty much their entire existence, but especially in recent years. However, Doc Rivers is not a victim of over-scrutinization. Doc Rivers is a victim of just not being very good at his job. There are aspects of it that he is notoriously good at, and there are aspects of it that he is notoriously bad at. And that's enough that he has built a great career. You know, he still has a lot of very strong 50-plus win seasons with good teams under his belt, but it's really hard to argue with the notion that you were carried by your superstar players when you are saying that that was overachieving, when it very much wasn't. It more just sounds like you couldn't dream big enough or didn't believe enough in the teams that you had. Now, there's only really 1 year of those 3-1 leads where they were outright a championship favorite. The Warriors were still a favorite when they blew the 3-1 lead to the Rockets. I'm pretty certain it was in 2015 now that I'm thinking back on it. But when that happened, the Clippers were not the favorites, but they were a contender and they had a chance to beat that Golden State team, but then they ended up getting cooked by Josh Smith and Corey Brewer, as I will mention, a second time. In the series where he was coaching the Orlando Magic and they blew a 3-1 lead, that was more understandable because they were not heavily favored in that series by any means. In fact, I believe they were favored to lose. And Tracy McGrady, he does have some stuff where he can have some playoff blunders, so I understand that. But your career has these blunders in it. And any head coach ever that has these kind of blunders in it would have that shit highlighted constantly, especially in our hypercritical age that we exist in now. It's not at a certain point doing it 3 times, you don't get to be mad at people about associating you with that. You do not. That team is a representation of yourself, and that is what you are accepting as a head coach. And there are plenty of coaches throughout history who are actually some of the 5 to 10 best coaches of all time, and not Doc Rivers, even though I believe the NBA anointed him as a top 10 coach of all time. Actually, top 10 coaches of all time would have taken those rosters that he had in LA and won a championship with them at least once. They certainly would have done more with the Philadelphia 76ers than he did, and I'm pretty confident they would have done more with the Milwaukee Bucks than he did. There's just, I cannot wrap my mind around a head coach having this mentality. It's something that I would be more okay with if his career was over, if Doc Rivers was retired, or if he was just like a media analyst now. But a quote like this, it reminds me of Nico Harrison when he was talking about the GMing job. It's not quite the same in terms of what the expression actually meant, but Nico Harrison saying, I'm not looking at the long view as 6 to 10 years from now. I'm looking at the long view as 2 to 4 years from now, because they're going to kill me and Jason Kidd, or whatever the fuck he said that Jason Kidd pretended that he found funny. Whatever that was, I understand why you would feel that way. I cannot comprehend ever saying that out loud to the media. That is baffling to me. If Doc wants to be behind closed doors being like, they don't give me enough credit for my 3 wins in the series that I lost, he can do that. If you're doing this shit publicly, if I'm a player in his locker room, I'm looking at him sideways. If I was a GM responsible for hiring a head coach and he said some shit like that to me about him blowing a 3-1 lead, I'd be like, okay, cool. So this guy doesn't have accountability. He doesn't seem to believe that highly in the teams that he's in. And for some reason, his expectations are always happily surpassed by embarrassing second round exits and just losing in a disappointing fashion. How can your team consistently overachieve if almost every time they lose the playoffs it had been when they were favored to win? That doesn't sound like overachievement to me. It sounds like underachievement. Maybe we just have a different idea of what those words mean. Maybe there's different ways that he measures success. But in the NBA world, with how we are evaluating head coaches, if you blow 3-1 leads, this is how people are going to talk about you, especially if you haven't done anything since to change your reputation. Like, he was the coach of the championship Celtics, but I think pretty much everybody has arrived to the point that Doc Rivers was coasting in that shit. He was bus riding, as the kids say. Like, even if he contributed positively, that was just adding on top of a team that was already destined to win the title. And when that's the only claim to fame you have, otherwise it's disappointment after disappointment after disappointment after disappointment after disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, the moment that you just have a lot of superstar power and not a shitload of it. I don't know what you expect. This is how opinions and thinking works. That's where I'm actually baffled on this. What a completely weird worldview you would need to even say something like this. I'm just going to pray that it was Cope that was caught on camera at the wrong time. But either way, he can't take that shit back.